Think he'll like this? I grinned. Bet I'll make you forget he exists tonight.
Think he'll like this? Ah!
Bet I'll make you forget he exists tonight.
He smelled danger before anyone saw it. Not smoke or fire. Something worse. Stagnant water. Earth that should breathe but couldn't. While sponsors sipped champagne on the terrace above, 2 tons of ancient oak stood on rotting foundations. One strong wind in the elegant garden party would become a disaster. If that tree fell, it wouldn't just crush people. It would destroy careers, reputations, and the woman who'd spent 10 years building something real in a world of beautiful lies. Before we start the story, write in the comments from which part of the world you're watching today. Dmitry Volkov knew trees the way sailors know the sea, by instinct older than thought, by signals most people never noticed. So when he walked into the botanical garden on that bright October morning and caught the smell, every alarm in his body went off at once. Not rot exactly, not decay. Something subtler and more dangerous. Earth holding too much water, roots drowning slowly, structural integrity compromising from the inside out while everything looked perfect on the surface. The garden was preparing for its annual gala, the biggest fundraising event of the year, 3 weeks away. Tents were being erected, lighting installed, catering stations marked with flags. 200 donors would gather beneath the historic oak that had stood for 3 centuries, symbol of permanence and prestige. Except the oak was dying, and nobody knew. Vera Sokolova met him at the entrance, clipboard in hand, exhaustion visible despite professional composure. Mid-30s, competent, running on too much coffee and too little sleep. Mr. Volkov, thank you for coming on short notice. Our regular arborist is unavailable, and we need certification for the event permits. What made you call me specifically? Your reputation. You don't sign off on things that aren't safe. She led him down the main path. The city requires inspection of any trees near public gatherings. Standard procedure. Standard procedure that most people treat as a formality. I don't. Too much liability. She glanced at him. And too many lives. Dmitry nodded approval. Competence recognized competence. They reached the oak, massive, majestic, branches spreading like architecture carved from living wood. Visitors stopped to photograph it. Children played beneath it. Everything looked exactly as a perfect tree should look. But the smell was stronger here. Dmitry knelt at the base, pressing his palm against bark. The texture was right, rough, healthy, no obvious decay. But when he dug his fingers into the soil surrounding the trunk, they sank too easily. How long has that irrigation system been running? He pointed to sprinkler heads visible in the landscaping. Year-round, the garden director insisted on maintaining perfect appearance. Who designed the drainage? I don't know, that was before my time. Dmitry stood, surveying the ground. Subtle depressions, areas where grass grew too lush, patches of moss that shouldn't exist in full sun, signs of water accumulation. I need to see beneath the surface. Can you authorize excavation? Vera's face tightened. Excavation? 3 weeks before the gala? If what I suspect is happening, you won't have a gala. You'll have a disaster. That's a serious claim. Yes, it is. Dmitry met her eyes. I don't make them lightly. She stared at the tree, at the flags marking where tables would stand, at the terrace where sponsors would gather, calculating risk against consequence. Show me, she said finally. Over the next 2 hours, Dmitry conducted preliminary tests. Soil probes, moisture readings, root examinations in areas where he could dig without destroying landscaping. Each test confirmed his fears. The drainage system installed decades ago had failed. Water pooled beneath the oak's root zone, creating anaerobic conditions. The tree's stability was compromised. Not catastrophically yet, but trending that direction. Under normal conditions, it might stand for years. But during a storm, with wind load on those massive branches, with soil integrity already weakened... How bad? Vera asked, watching him document findings. The oak is standing on what's essentially mud. Not everywhere, there's still some structure, but enough that I can't certify it as safe for a gathering of 200 people. Can it be fixed? Yes, with proper drainage installation, root zone management, structural support. But it takes time. Months, ideally. Weeks minimum. We have 3 weeks. Then you have a choice to make. Cancel the event and do this right, or proceed and accept the risk. Vera looked at him like he'd suggested burning down the garden. Cancel? Do you know who's coming to this? The mayor, major donors, press coverage. We've been promoting this for 6 months. Elena Volkova herself is... She stopped abruptly. Who's Elena Volkova? Board director, major benefactor. She's particular about things proceeding as planned. More particular than she is about people's safety? It's not that simple, Vera rubbed her temples. She's kept this garden funded through 3 recessions. Without her support, we'd have closed years ago, and she views any change to established plans as personal failure. So we risk lives to avoid inconvenience? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? Vera was quiet for a long moment, staring at the oak. Then, what's the minimum work required to make this safe for the event? Not perfect, safe. Dmitri considered. He didn't like compromises when it came to safety, but he also understood reality. Sometimes you worked with the options available rather than the options you wanted. Install emergency drainage, redirect water away from the root zone, add cable support to the major limbs to reduce wind load, monitor constantly and have contingency evacuation plans if weather turns severe. He paused. It's not ideal, but it might be enough. How long? 2 weeks of hard work, then 1 week for monitoring before the event. And the cost? He gave her a number. She flinched but nodded. I'll have to get approval. From Elena Volkova. Yes. And if she says no? Then I find another arborist who will sign the certificate without asking difficult questions. Vera met his eyes. But I'd rather not. Dmitri respected that, the admission of compromise paired with the desire to avoid it. When will you know? Tomorrow. She's visiting the garden in the afternoon. Can you come back then? I'll be here. That evening, Dmitri sat in his small office reviewing his findings. The numbers were clear, the recommendations straightforward, but 30 years in this profession had taught him that facts mattered less than people's willingness to accept them. Elena Volkova would likely reject his assessment. Too expensive, too disruptive, too last minute. She'd find another professional willing to sign off, someone more concerned with keeping clients happy than keeping people safe. And Dmitri would walk away, reputation intact but conscience troubled, unless Vera chose differently. The next afternoon, he returned to the garden. The atmosphere had changed, tension visible in the hurried movements of staff, the tight expression on Vera's face when she met him at the entrance. She's here, on the terrace, reviewing final plans with the event coordinator. Vera's voice was controlled but strained. I showed her your report this morning. She called it alarmist and unnecessary. Did she read it? I don't know. She said her family has been supporting this garden for 40 years, and the oak has stood for 300. Those numbers matter more than moisture readings. Those numbers won't matter when the tree falls. I know. That's why I asked you here anyway. Vera straightened her shoulders. Present your findings directly. Let her hear it from you. They walked to the terrace, elegant stone platform overlooking the garden, perfect view of the oak in all its deceptive beauty. Elena Volkova stood at the railing, mid-50s, dressed in white that probably cost more than Dmitri's truck. Beside her, 2 assistants hovered with tablets and concerned expressions. Miss Volkova, Vera said carefully, this is Dmitri Volkov, the arborist I mentioned. Elena turned, gaze moving over Dmitri with the swift assessment of someone used to categorizing people instantly. He knew what she saw: work clothes, calloused hands, dirt under fingernails despite washing. Not her world. Mr. Volkov, I understand you have concerns about our oak. I have findings. Whether they're concerns depends on how you respond to them. Her eyebrow raised slightly. Direct. I appreciate that. Present your case. Dmitri laid out the evidence: soil conditions, water accumulation, structural compromise. He used plain language, avoided technical jargon, made the risk clear without exaggeration. Elena listened without interrupting, face impassive. When he finished, she said, "And your recommendation?" Install emergency drainage and structural support. 2 weeks of work. Then proceed with the event under monitored conditions. Or cancel and do comprehensive rehabilitation over several months. Cancel. She repeated the word like it was foreign. Mr. Volkov, Do you understand what this event represents? Not just funding, but legacy. My grandmother planted companion trees in this garden. My mother established the endowment that keeps it free to the public. This gala celebrates that history. I understand legacy. I also understand physics. The oak doesn't care about history when wind load exceeds structural capacity. You're being dramatic. I'm being accurate. Elena's expression hardened. I've consulted with 3 other professionals. All agreed the tree is stable. When did they inspect? 6 months ago, annual review. Conditions change, especially with compromised drainage. Then we'll add monitoring. But we're not excavating the garden 3 weeks before our signature event. She turned to Vera. Find a solution that doesn't involve destruction of the landscape. That's what I pay you for. Ms. Volkova, Vera started. This conversation is over. Mr. Volkov, thank you for your input. We'll proceed with our existing timeline. Elena gathered her materials, assistants scrambling to follow. She paused at the terrace steps. And Vera? I expect better judgment in consultant selection going forward. Alarmism isn't helpful. She left, white clothing stark against the garden's greens, trailing authority like perfume. Vera stood motionless, staring after her. Then, I'm sorry. I thought if she heard it directly. She heard it. She chose not to listen. There's a difference. Dmitri gathered his equipment. You have my report, my recommendations. If you proceed without addressing the issues, I can't certify the tree is safe. I know. So what will you do? Vera looked at the oak, at the garden she'd managed for 5 years, at the choice between duty and employment. The work you described, emergency drainage and support, can it be done quietly, without major visible disruption? Quietly enough. The excavation will be obvious, but temporary. Why? She met his eyes. Because I'm authorizing it, without permission. Using discretionary budget Elena doesn't monitor closely. That's a significant risk. Less significant than someone dying because I was afraid to act. Dmitri felt something shift, respect deepening into something more. You could lose your position. I could live with losing my job. I couldn't live with losing someone because I chose politics over safety. All right, he extended his hand. We start tomorrow, early, and we work fast. She shook his hand, firm grip, steady despite the fear he could see beneath her composure. Tomorrow. As Dmitri drove home that evening, he thought about the choices people made when consequences mattered. Elena had chosen legacy over safety. Vera had chosen the opposite, knowing it might cost her everything. And in 3 weeks, one of them would be proven right. He just hoped it wasn't at the cost of lives. The work began at 6 the next morning, before the garden opened to visitors. Dmitri arrived with his crew, 2 men he'd worked with for years, both skilled and discreet. They set up barriers around the oak, marked excavation zones, and began the careful process of exposing the root system without causing additional damage. Vera appeared at 7, coffee in hand, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she'd slept as little as Dmitri had. How bad is it? She asked, watching them dig. Worse than I hoped. Better than I feared. He pointed to exposed roots. See how the bark's discolored there? That's water damage. Long-term saturation. The tree's been compensating, but it's losing the battle. Can you fix it? We can stabilize it. Whether that's enough depends on weather and luck. They worked through the morning, installing drainage pipes, redirecting water flow, removing waterlogged soil, and replacing it with proper substrate. Passers-by stopped to watch, ask questions. Vera handled them with professional calm, explaining routine maintenance while Dmitri and his crew worked. By afternoon, they'd made significant progress. The drainage system was functional, water already flowing away from the root zone. Next came the structural support, cables installed high in the canopy to reduce stress on major limbs. You'll need a lift for that, Vera observed. Arrives tomorrow. We'll work after hours to avoid disrupting visitors. I appreciate that. I appreciate you letting us do this at all. She smiled faintly. Ask me again when Elena finds out. The call came 2 days later. Dmitri was 40 feet up in the oak, installing support cables, when he saw the white car pull into the garden parking area. Elena emerged, flanked by assistants, moving with the purposeful stride of someone prepared for confrontation. He descended quickly. By the time he reached ground level, Elena was already facing Vera near the work barriers, voice carrying across the morning air. Explicitly instructed no excavation, yet I arrived to find my garden torn apart. It's temporary disruption for permanent safety, Vera said, voice steady despite visible tension. Safety I didn't authorize, using budget you had no authority to spend. I had discretionary. Discretionary means minor adjustments, not unauthorized construction projects. Elena's gaze swept the worksite, landing on Dmitri. Mr. Volkov, still here despite my clear dismissal of your recommendations? Miss Sokolova hired me to do a job. I'm doing it. A job I explicitly rejected. With respect, you rejected facts. Those don't change based on preference. Elena's expression turned cold. You have a remarkable talent for insubordination. I have a talent for keeping people alive. Sometimes those look similar. For a moment, genuine anger flashed across Elena's face. Then she composed herself, turning back to Vera. My office. Now. We'll discuss your future here. I need to coordinate now, Miss Sokolova. Vera glanced at Dmitri, something apologetic and resigned in her expression, then followed Elena toward the administrative building. Dmitri's crew looked at him questioningly. Keep working, he said. We're not done. An hour later, Vera returned alone. Her face was carefully neutral, but her hand shook slightly as she approached. She's putting me on notice. 2 weeks to prove the work was necessary or my contract isn't renewed. 2 weeks. That's exactly when the gala happens. I know. She's setting me up. If nothing goes wrong, she claims vindication that the work was unnecessary. If something does go wrong, I take the blame for poor execution. That's strategic, ruthless, exactly how she's operated for 20 years. Vera looked at the oak, at the excavation that had cost her security. But I still made the right choice. Yes, you did. Will the work be finished in time? If nothing else goes wrong, yes. And if something does? Dmitri met her eyes. Then we deal with it, together. Something shifted in her expression, gratitude mixed with something deeper. Why are you still here? You could walk away, let this become my problem alone. Because walking away from work half done isn't something I do. And because, he paused, choosing words carefully, because someone finally chose right over easy. That's rare, worth supporting. They stood in comfortable silence, watching his crew work. Then Vera said quietly, I was supposed to go to a donor dinner tonight, networking, smiling, pretending everything's perfect, but I think I'd rather stay here, help however I can. You don't have to, I know, but I want to. That evening, as sunset painted the garden golden, Vera appeared in jeans and work boots instead of the elegant dress she'd mentioned. Dmitri couldn't help smiling. What? She asked. Nothing. Just didn't expect the garden manager to show up ready to dig trenches. There's a lot people don't expect about me. They worked side by side as darkness fell, installing the final drainage sections by work lights. At some point, conversation shifted from work to life, her path from botany student to garden management, his journey from forestry to specialized arboriculture. Small revelations that built understanding. Around 9, she stood up, stretching tired muscles. I should go. Early meeting tomorrow. Same time tomorrow? Definitely. As she walked toward the parking area, Dmitri watched her go, thinking about courage that didn't announce itself, that just showed up in work boots when easier options existed. The next week passed in intensive work. Cables installed, drainage completed, root zones stabilized. Each day brought small victories and new challenges. And each day, Vera appeared after her official duties ended, helping however she could. One evening, installing the final support, Dmitri's foot slipped on wet bark. He caught himself, but the near fall sent adrenaline spiking. Vera, holding the work light below, went pale. Are you okay? Fine. Just reminder to stay focused. When he descended, she was still shaken. If you'd fallen, I didn't. But you could have, because I asked you to do this work, because I chose this path. No, because I chose to help. That's on me, not you. She looked at him then, really looked, seeing not just the arborist, but the person. You're different from most people I work with. Different how? Honest, direct. You say what you mean without calculating how it'll be received. She paused. It's refreshing and slightly terrifying. He smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither quite acknowledged. Then Vera's phone buzzed. Urgent message about event planning crisis, and the moment broke. I should handle this, she said. Go, we're finishing up anyway. But as she left, Dmitri noticed she looked back twice, and both times he was still watching. The work was completed with 3 days to spare. Final inspection showed significant improvement. Soil draining properly, root health stabilizing, structural support reducing stress on major limbs. It'll hold, Dmitri told Vera, barring extraordinary circumstances. What counts as extraordinary? Severe storm, hurricane-force winds, lightning strike. So basically what we can't control. Exactly. She nodded, accepting the reality. Then we've done what we can. You did what was right. That matters more than outcomes. Try telling that to Elena when she reviews my performance. I will if necessary, Vera smiled. I believe you would. The gala was 2 days away when the forecast changed. A major storm system, previously tracking south, had shifted northward. Heavy winds expected. Possible severe weather. Dmitri called Vera immediately. Have you seen the forecast? Yes. What do we do? Monitor. Prepare. Have evacuation plans ready if conditions deteriorate during the event. Elena will never agree to cancellation based on a forecast. Then we work with what we have. The night before the gala, they stood together beneath the oak, watching clouds gather. Whatever happens tomorrow, Vera said quietly, thank you for believing the work mattered. It does matter. People just forget that sometimes. Not you. Not you either. That's why we're here. She moved closer, not quite touching, but near enough that he felt her warmth. I'm glad it was you. Who showed up. Who stayed. Me too. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Storm, safety, consequences. But tonight, standing beneath the tree they'd fought to save, 2 people who'd chosen integrity over convenience found something neither expected. Connection forged through shared values and work that mattered. The morning of the gala arrived with deceptive calm. Overcast but stable, wind light, storm still hours away according to forecasts. Dmitri arrived at dawn to conduct final safety checks. The oak stood firm, cables secured, drainage functioning. Everything they could control was controlled. What remained was weather and luck. By 10, the garden transformed. Catering trucks arrived, florists positioned arrangements, technicians tested lighting. Vera moved through it all with practiced efficiency, checking details, solving problems, projecting confidence while tension showed in the tightness around her eyes. Elena appeared at 11, inspecting the setup with critical precision. She walked the perimeter of the oak, examining the work that had been done, saying nothing. When she finally approached Vera, her expression was unreadable. The excavation scars are visible. They'll fade. The tree is stable. We'll see. Elena moved on without further comment, leaving ambiguity hanging like a threat. At noon, Dimitri's phone buzzed. Weather update, storm intensifying, arrival time moved earlier, winds potentially reaching severe levels by evening. He found Vera coordinating table placements. We need to talk, privately. They stepped away from the activity. He showed her the forecast. This is getting serious. You should consider postponing. With guests arriving in 4 hours? Elena would never. Elena doesn't control the weather. No, but she controls my employment. And suggesting cancellation now, after everything. Vera looked at the preparations, at staff working, at the reality of timing. What are the actual risks? The oak should hold. We've reduced the critical stress points. But if winds exceed 50 kilometers per hour, we're in uncertain territory. And there's lightning potential. Evacuation plans? Already positioned. First sign of dangerous conditions, we move everyone to the main building. How much warning would we have? Minutes, maybe less. She was quiet, weighing impossible calculations. Then, we proceed. But you stay. Monitor conditions. At first sign of real danger, we evacuate, regardless of Elena's objections. That could cause panic. Better panic than tragedy. Dmitri nodded. All position equipment to track wind speeds and lightning activity. The afternoon passed in tense preparation. By 4, guests began arriving. Elegant cars, designer clothes, the wealthy moving with casual certainty through a world that usually bent to their preferences. Elena held court near the oak, greeting donors, projecting mastery. She saw Dmitri monitoring equipment and approached, wine glass in hand. "Still here, Mr. Volkov? I thought your work was complete." "It is. I'm observing conditions." How cautious, almost paranoid. She sipped her wine. "But then, your entire approach has been based on exaggerated concerns, hasn't it?" "My approach is based on physics and experience. Neither exaggerate." "And yet here we are. Beautiful evening, stable tree, successful event. Perhaps your alarmism was misplaced." Before Dmitri could respond, thunder rolled in the distance. Elena glanced at the darkening sky, smile faltering slightly. "Just weather. Nothing we can't handle." She walked away, but her confidence looked more performed than felt. By 6, the sky had turned threatening, clouds low and dark, wind beginning to gust. Guests noticed, conversations shifting to weather commentary mixed with nervous laughter. Staff hurried to secure decorations. Vera appeared at Dmitri's side. "Wind speed?" 35 kilometers per hour, rising. "Lightning?" "Distant, but moving this direction." She bit her lip, calculating. "We've got maybe an hour before this gets serious." "Maybe." "All position staff near exits. Prepare quiet evacuation routes. If you give the signal..." A stronger gust hit, rattling branches overhead. Someone shrieked, then laughed to cover embarrassment. But the tension was spreading, guests eyeing the sky with increasing concern. Elena noticed, moved to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, a bit of weather adds drama to our evening, doesn't it? But I assure you, we're perfectly safe. This garden has weathered storms for centuries." Applause, but uncertain. People wanted to believe her authority extended to nature itself. Then Dmitri's equipment alarm sounded, wind speed crossing 50 kilometers per hour. He caught Vera's eye across the crowd. She understood immediately, moving toward Elena's position. Dmitri began walking the perimeter, checking structural points, watching the oak's response to increasing wind load. The cables held, branches flexed but within acceptable range. The root work was performing as designed. Maybe Elena had been right. Maybe everything would be. Lightning struck somewhere close. Thunder arrived instantly, no gap, meaning danger was immediate. Guests screamed, wine glasses shattered. The elegant gathering dissolved into fear. "Everyone inside!" Vera's voice cut through panic. "Calmly but quickly, follow the lit pathways to the main building." Staff appeared, guiding people, managing the evacuation with practiced efficiency. But Elena's voice rose above the chaos. "This is an overreaction. The storm will pass." Another lightning strike, closer. Rain began falling in heavy sheets. Dmitri reached Elena's position. "Move, now." "You don't give me orders." "I'm not ordering, I'm informing. Lightning doesn't care about your authority. Move or stay, but don't block others." She stared at him, fury and fear mixing on her face. Then self-preservation won, and she hurried toward shelter, dignity abandoned in favor of safety. Within minutes, the terrace was empty except for Dmitri, Vera, and a few staff doing final checks. Wind howled, rain fell sideways, lightning painted everything in violent brightness. "You need to get inside," Dmitri told Vera. "So do you." "I'm checking the oak one more time." "Then I'm coming with you." They ran together through the storm toward the tree. Rain soaked through clothes instantly. Wind made standing difficult. But the oak. Dmitri checked cables, examined trunk movement, assessed root stability. It was holding. Everything they'd done, every hour of work, every calculation, it was working. Then a cracking sound, loud even over the storm. But it wasn't the oak. One of the decorative structures, a lattice arch Elena had insisted on keeping despite Dmitri's concerns, was tearing loose from its anchors. 2 tons of metal and wood swinging in the wind like a weapon. "Run!" Dmitri grabbed Vera's arm. They sprinted as the structure collapsed, missing them by meters, crashing into the space where they'd been standing seconds before. They stopped in the rain, breathing hard, staring at the wreckage. If they'd been slower, if Dmitri hadn't heard the sound, if... Vera turned to him, face pale, rain streaming down. "You saved my life." We saved each other's. That's how this works. The storm raged for another 20 minutes, then passed with the same sudden intensity it had arrived. Silence fell, broken only by dripping water and distant thunder. They walked back to the main building together, exhausted, soaked, alive. Inside, guests had gathered in the grand hall, wet, shaken, but safe. Elena stood apart, speaking urgently on her phone. When she saw Dmitri and Vera enter, something flickered across her face. Not quite gratitude, but acknowledgement. The oak stood visible through the windows, branches swaying gently in post-storm breeze, roots firmly anchored in properly drained soil. It had held. Everything they'd fought for, risked for, worked for, had mattered. And that, Dmitri thought, was victory enough. The morning after the storm, the garden looked like a battlefield. Fallen branches, debris scattered across pathways, the collapsed decorative structure a twisted monument to poor planning. But the oak stood undamaged. Dmitri arrived at dawn to find Vera already there, photographing the wreckage. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. Couldn't sleep? Too much adrenaline still. She gestured at the collapsed structure. This could have killed someone. It almost did. But it didn't, because we evacuated in time, because you were monitoring. She lowered her camera. Elena's calling an emergency board meeting this afternoon to review what happened. And blame you for the evacuation? Probably. She's already questioning whether the storm was actually severe enough to justify the disruption. Dmitri stared at her. People could have died. I know. But Elena sees a successful event interrupted, donors frightened, reputation damaged. In her calculation, that matters more than hypothetical danger. It wasn't hypothetical. We have wind speed data, lightning proximity readings, structural failure evidence. He pointed at the wreckage. That's real, not theoretical. Will you present that at the meeting? If you want me there. Vera met his eyes. I want you there, because I think we're about to face something worse than the storm. The board meeting convened at 2 in the garden's administrative building. 8 board members, Elena at the head, Vera and Dmitri seated across from them like defendants. Elena opened without preamble. Last night's event was disrupted due to weather concerns raised by our contractor. I've called this meeting to review whether that disruption was justified or an overreaction that damaged our reputation with major donors. People were evacuated because of dangerous conditions, Vera said calmly. The decision was correct. That's your assessment. Others disagree. Elena gestured to a board member. Mr. Petrov reviewed the weather data. Please share your findings. Petrov, silver-haired and confident, stood. Based on official weather service records, wind speeds peaked at 48 kilometers per hour in our area, below the threshold typically considered dangerous. Lightning was present but not directly threatening. In my professional opinion, I'm a civil engineer, evacuation was premature. He's wrong, Dmitri said quietly. The room went silent. Elena's expression hardened. Excuse me? He's wrong. His data comes from the regional weather station 3 kilometers away. I had equipment on site measuring actual conditions. Wind gusts exceeded 60 kilometers per hour. Lightning struck within 200 meters multiple times. Do you have proof? Dmitri pulled out his tablet, displayed the readings. Time-stamped, GPS verified, calibrated equipment. This is what actually happened, not what a distant station recorded. Petrov leaned forward, examining the data. His confidence wavered. These readings, if accurate, would indeed justify evacuation. They're accurate, Elena intervened. But the larger issue remains. The tree stood firm, which suggests all the emergency work Miss Sokolova authorized without permission was unnecessary expense and disruption. The tree stood firm because of that work, Vera countered. Mr. Volkov's initial assessment showed dangerous instability. The drainage and support systems we installed are the only reason the oak survived last night's winds. That's speculation. It's engineering, Dmitri said. The root zone was saturated, structural integrity compromised. Without intervention, that tree would have failed under storm conditions. And when 3 tons of oak falls on a crowd, he let the implication hang. Another board member, an older woman, spoke up. Do you have evidence of the tree's previous condition? Soil samples, moisture readings, structural analysis, all documented before work began. Dmitri showed additional data. These aren't opinions, they're measurements. The board members reviewed the information, expressions shifting from skepticism to concern. Even Petrov nodded slowly, professional integrity overcoming politics. Elena saw control slipping. Even accepting your data, the fact remains Ms. Sokolova acted without authorization. That's a procedural violation regardless of outcome. She acted to prevent loss of life, Dmitri said. That's not a violation, that's leadership. You're not qualified to assess leadership, you're a contractor. I'm qualified to assess integrity. And I've seen more of it from Vera in 3 weeks than I've seen from this board in 30 years working with institutions like this. The words landed hard. Several board members looked uncomfortable. Elena's face flushed. That's inappropriate. What's inappropriate is prioritizing ego over safety. Vera made the hard choice, the right choice. If you punish her for that, you're telling every future employee to choose politics over people. Dmitri stood. I've presented the facts. The tree was dangerous. The work was necessary. The evacuation saved lives. What you do with that information reveals who you are. He walked out, leaving silence behind. 5 minutes later, Vera found him outside, standing in morning light. That was too much? Perfect, she smiled. They're deliberating now, but I think you shifted things. Or made it worse. No, you spoke truth. That matters. They stood together, not touching, but close, watching the oak sway gently in post-storm breeze. An hour later, Vera received the board's decision. Her contract would be renewed, the emergency work retroactively approved, and Elena removed as primary decision-maker for operational safety issues. Not a complete victory. Elena retained her board position and influence, but the power dynamic had shifted. That evening, Vera called Dmitri. Thank you for standing with me, for saying what needed saying. I just stated facts. You defended someone who chose right over easy. That's more than facts. Then you're welcome. A pause. Then, would you want to have dinner? Not business, just us. Dmitri smiled. Yes, I'd like that. Tomorrow night? Tomorrow night. After hanging up, he sat in his office looking at photos of the oak, before and after, danger and stability, work that mattered documented in images. Sometimes the hardest battles weren't against nature, but against people who refused to see it clearly. But when you found someone who did see, who chose truth despite cost, that was worth fighting for. Tree or person, the principle was the same. Proper foundation, careful attention, and willingness to do hard work when it mattered most. Everything else was just weather. 3 months after the storm, Dmitri returned to the garden for a routine follow-up inspection. The oak had thrived. New growth appeared along branches, leaves greener and more vigorous than before. The drainage system functioned perfectly, soil conditions optimal. Everything they'd fought for had taken root, literally and figuratively. Vera met him at the entrance, smiling in a way that still made something shift in his chest. They'd been seeing each other regularly since that first dinner, building something steady and real through shared meals, long conversations, and comfortable silences. "Ready to see your patient?" she asked. "Our patient?" They walked together to the oak. Dmitri conducted his assessment while Vera watched, asking technical questions, genuinely interested in the details. She'd learned more about arboriculture in 3 months than most people learned in years. "Verdict?" she asked when he finished. "Healthiest I've seen it. The work made a permanent difference." "Because someone refused to compromise on safety." "Because we both did." She smiled. "We make a good team." "Yes, we do." They stood beneath the branches, dappled sunlight filtering through leaves. The garden was quiet, midweek afternoon, few visitors, peaceful in a way that felt earned rather than given. "Elena's retiring," Vera said. "Announced it last week. Health reasons, officially. But everyone knows it's because she lost control after the board investigation." "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved. Guilty for feeling relieved. Grateful it's over." She leaned against the oak's trunk. "They've asked me to join the board, replace her position." Dmitri raised his eyebrows. "That's significant." "It is, but I'm not sure I want it. More politics, less actual work. More compromise, less direct action." She looked at him. What would you do? I'd ask what serves the garden best, not your career. The actual trees and soil and living things you're responsible for. That's why I love you. The words hung in the air. First time either had said them explicitly. Vera's eyes widened slightly, surprised by her own honesty. Dmitri stepped closer. Good, because I love you too. Have for a while now. Since when? Since you chose safety over security. Since you showed up in work boots instead of going to that donor dinner. Since you stood in the rain checking a tree while everyone else ran for shelter. He touched her face gently. Since I realized you see the world the same way I do. Worth protecting. Worth the hard work. She kissed him then, slow and certain, beneath branches they'd saved together. When they pulled apart, she said, I'm taking the board position, but on my terms. Operational control over safety decisions, budget authority for necessary work, no compromises on fundamentals. They'll agree to that? After what happened? They'll agree or I walk. Either way, I'm done letting fear of consequences prevent right action. That's the woman I fell for. They spent the afternoon in the garden, not working but simply existing in the space they'd fought to preserve. As sunset approached, painting everything golden, Vera said quietly, Thank you. For what? For being honest when it was hard, for standing beside me when it was risky, for showing me that doing right matters more than being liked. You already knew that. You just needed permission to act on it. Maybe, but you gave me that permission. By example. They walked toward the exit as the garden prepared to close. At the gate, Vera paused, looking back at the oak standing strong against the evening sky. It's going to outlive us both, she said. Yes, but we gave it that chance. That matters. Everything you do matters. That's what makes you remarkable. I'm not remarkable. I'm just consistent. Same thing, in a world where most people aren't. Dmitri took her hand as they left the garden. Behind them, the oak stood in deepening twilight, roots deep, branches high, properly anchored and finally thriving. Some victories weren't loud or dramatic. Some were just quiet persistence, choosing right over easy, day after day, until the work was done and something worth protecting stood stronger than before. That evening, in Dmitri's small house, they cooked dinner together. Simple food, easy companionship, the comfort of two people who'd chosen each other carefully and meant to keep choosing. What's your next project? Vera asked over wine. Century-old maple in the city park. Structural concerns. City wants certification before allowing climbing activities. Sounds familiar. Most good work does. Same principles, different trees. Need a volunteer assistant? He smiled. Always. Later, standing on his porch looking at stars, Vera said, I never thanked you properly. For that first day. For taking my concerns seriously when you could have just signed the certificate and walked away. That was never an option. It was. Most people would have taken it. Then most people aren't paying attention. He pulled her close. Trees don't lie. Soil doesn't perform. Either the work is right or it's not. Everything else is just noise. I love your certainty. I love that you share it. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other through crisis and built something lasting through shared values and honest work. The oak would stand for decades, maybe centuries more. People would gather beneath it, photograph it, admire its beauty without knowing the effort required to preserve it. But Dmitri and Vera would know, would remember the choice between easy and right, between reputation and reality, between comfort and conscience. And in choosing right, they'd found not just success, but each other. Some storms destroy, some reveal what's built to last. Theirs had done both, swept away pretense and left behind foundations strong enough to build a life on. And that, Dmitri thought, watching Vera smile at something only she could see in the darkness, was the best kind of victory. Not dramatic, not loud, just real, just lasting, just right.